ahead. And first off, we're gonna have approval of the meetings. The minute summary and transcript from the August 30th meeting. Has everyone had opportunity? Our vice chair would like to make a motion of approval of the meetings from August 30th, 2022. Motion is approved. Next, we'll take a vote. If all in approval says yes. Yes. Any disapproval? Okay, passes. Motion passes. Thank you. Next, we're gonna have go over a couple of resolutions. We have Maria Rico resolution.
Okay.
And Maria, before we go on, you confirm that we have had a notice obligation for the meeting today.
Yes, sir.
And we do have a quorum.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
A resolution authorizing the vice chair of the Sports Authority of the County of Hamilton and the City of Chattanooga, Tennessee, to execute a city authority service agreement with the City of Chattanooga and the County of Hamilton, SA 011.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So this resolution essentially authorizes an agreement between the Sports Authority, the City of Chattanooga, and Hamilton County for services that are provided to the Sports Authority by the City of Chattanooga. For example, administrative support, legal support, financial support, project management, anything that's administrative or legal in nature on behalf of the Sports Authority, because the Sports Authority does not have a staff. That work needs to be done either by the city or the county. And what this agreement would do is would designate the City of Chattanooga to provide this administrative and legal support to the Sports Authority. We've had this similar type of agreement in place for other boards throughout the city. For example, the Chattanooga Downtown Redevelopment Corporation has a similar agreement in place because they also do not have staff, but they do have significant financial transactions and ownership of property. So we just want to make sure that this is documented and publicly available to indicate that the city is providing these services free of charge to the Sports Authority, which is a separate corporation. And the only other thing I'll mention is that the only other precedent I can think of for this type of arrangement is the Enterprise South work that was done before Volkswagen came to that site. The city and county jointly were in on that project, obviously, and then the city was the primary administrative support for the project, both from project management standpoint and several other aspects. But of course, the city and the county worked together on that project very well, and we plan to continue working together on this project.
All in favor, say yes. Yes. Any opposed? This motion is approved. This document will have to be approved by both the city and the county here in connection with this. It's a three-party memorandum of understanding. So we'll get that done by the appropriate entity. Okay. And next on the agenda is a resolution appointing J.P. Morgan Securities LLC as senior managing operator, and FHN Financial Capital Markets, Cheever Williams Shank and Company LLC, and Academy Securities Incorporated, and Strada and Joe Hoser and Company as co-managers of home stadium financing. We have some more presentation on this.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair. As you all will recall, the board hired PFM as the financial advisor for the Sports Authority. PFM also serves as the financial advisor for the city of Chattanooga and Hamilton County. The board also has previously approved PFM to issue an RFP to determine underwriters for the proposed bonds. And we have Lauren Lowe here from PFM to make a presentation regarding the process as well as the recommendation to the board for selection of an underwriting syndicate. So I'll turn it over to Lauren Lowe if there's no objection.
My control slides, or were they?
You should be able to. Yeah. It's this button.
Okay, thank you. Hi, good morning. I'm Lauren Lowe with PFM. Thanks for having me. So before I get started, I felt like it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the role of the banks that you had listed in your resolution, and then ultimately the process and the recommendation that PFM is providing based on our experience in the market and serving in the capacity as financial advisor. So traditionally, the city of Chattanooga and Hamilton County, when it goes to borrow money, it typically borrows money through a bond issue, through a competitive sale. That's a competitive public sale in which any bank can bid, anything from a local bank to a large Wall Street national bank. There is a state law that actually requires that if the city or the county were pledging its general obligation or its taxing authority to do that. So by state statute, that is the process that you must undertake. Both city and county have very strong credit ratings, so they do very well in the competitive market. It traditionally results in very good results that we are very pleased, and we recommend that those two governing bodies accept the. In the case of the Sports Authority, while we ultimately recommended a slightly different process to access investors and issue bonds, which is referred to as a negotiated, is really because this is a new entity. It's not one of which that a name is known about. Obviously, you all know about it in this community, but not necessarily on a larger landscape thinking about investors. So that was one of the considerations. The other is when you look at sort of the underlying revenue streams, there's going to need to be a story told to investors, and you can't do that through a competitive sale. You sort of put your facts out there, no interaction with investors, and just let the chips fall where they may. This process through a negotiated sale allows you to hire banks. In this case, we'll refer to them as an underwriting syndicate, to really serve in the capacity of not only just bringing investors to the table, but conveying the story, the message around the security, what's going to pay them back, and the overall project. So that's why we ultimately recommended a negotiated sale. So to go through a negotiated sale, you must hire a senior manager and also co-managers. And I'm going to talk through how we went through that process, which was done through an RFP that we issued on behalf of the Sports Authority. So to kind of come back to why there is a project underway here, it's for the financing of a construction of a multi-use sports and entertainment stadium. We understand that the size of any offering would be up to approximately $80 million. And we believe, based on our experience in the industry, that selecting a banking group of approximately 4 to 6 participants would result in the best outcome. We all know lowest cost usually tends to be one of the goals that we want to achieve. So on the 26th of September, PFM distributed a list, the underwriter RFP, to a short list. And what that means is we actually didn't cast the widest net, but we cast a very strategic net. So we went back to, as I refer to the city and the county doing competitive sales, we went back to who actually is buying the city of Chattanooga bonds, who's buying Hamilton County bonds, and who's very active in stadium financings. And we also, when the city or the county issues bonds, you'll see one bank on Citigroup, for example. Citigroup as a name, but what we can see is underpinning Citigroup, there's a bunch of other banks that are supporting them and making that bid. So we also went to look to not only just those big names that we see, but we also went to disadvantaged enterprises. So those are going to be veteran-owned, minority-owned, Hispanic-owned, and women-owned firms as well. So our RFP process went to many banks, but they were very much strategically picked based on their experience working with the city and the county and stadiums. We requested responses to 7 different questions and topics, which I'll walk through. And then the goal of this is to select the senior manager. So that's the main bank that the Sports Authority would have communication and coordination with. And then you select those co-managers that ultimately support them when it comes time to talk to investors. So here are the questions and topics that we posed to the market. We asked about marketing, and that was very specific to how do they market a credit like this, one that's not a name that's been seen before, that includes the underlying revenues, the credits of the city and the county. And we've also asked them to not shy off on any challenges that we may see specific to this credit or specific to the market. We asked them to provide any unique approach to attracting investors, whether they're investors that we already see actively holding city and county bonds, or maybe it's investors that we see are actively in Tennessee but don't have a lot of city of Chattanooga or Hamilton County exposure. And also, what did they expect to be the outcome of those opportunities to market to the investors? We asked them to speak to how they would make up the right banking team and distribution network because, as you all may expect, a smaller bank or a disadvantaged enterprise is going to have a different set of investors versus a large national Wall Street bank. We asked them to speak to capital position, so how much could they support in the event investors were not there to buy the entire offering at the time of pricing. We asked them to give examples of when they have done this in the past, and they did that through case studies and other facts that were helpful. We also specifically asked for case studies that are most relevant to this transaction, specifically with stadium financing or new credits. We did go back to January of 2020, recognizing that the last few years have been unique, and we would rather them focus on the last few years versus pre-pandemic. We also asked how would they expect to price this? So at the end of the day, those pricing levels or the interest rates are really going to be the focal point of what drives costs. Yes, they will make a compensation, but we are more focused on what do you think this is going to price at? And certainly PFM did our own independent analysis prior to receiving those, and we compared our independent view versus each one of the proposals received. And then ultimately, we know they have to get paid. So we did compare their cost structure to one another to ensure it felt like it was competitive and that else would you pay more for bank X versus bank Y. So of the process that we did, we received 17 responses. We did not ask them how they would like to serve, meaning what capacity. Do they want to be a senior manager, that lead bank, or would they want to be a co-manager? Some were very forthcoming, and we can tell you from experience, any of the larger, more regional, national firms will want to be in that senior position. So we did categorize them for you here. You will see and these are in alphabetical order, everything from Bank of America all the way to Wells Fargo and in the running for that senior manager position. And the co-manager column to the right is those that we saw serving as a support role for those competitive sales that the city and the county have done in the past. It should be noted as we think about the selection, and we'll walk through what our ultimate recommendation is. Even if someone's under that senior manager column, they can still serve in the capacity as a co-manager to support the lead bank. Hold on, I think I went too far here. Okay, on slide 5, you'll see that 10 of them are classified as either minority woman-owned, or veteran-owned enterprises. We did highlight those in blue that have that distinction that was noted in their proposal and from the experience that we have working with them. So PFM went through the process of reviewing all of these, and the goal is first to select that senior manager or lead bank, and then follow up and select those supportive roles as co-managers based on who you selected as a senior. So what really complements and supports that senior manager to ultimately attract the most investors and drive down interest rates. We did an independent review of those 17 proposals. We did provide to the city and county supporting staff summaries of all the proposals as well as all the proposals received. Based on our review, we did shortlist 3 of those in the senior manager column that we felt were the most thorough, most intentional about the credit, the ideas around attracting investors, and ultimately looking at how they would potentially price these bonds. Those 3 are in alphabetical order: Bank of America, FHN Financial, and JP Morgan Securities. Also looking that we wanted to create a diverse team, because a diverse team will ultimately serve the Sports Authority offering in the best capacity, because you're going to bring in diverse investors as well. We then shortlisted those that were in that co-manager column in alphabetical order of Academy, American Veterans, and Estrada Hosanna. So then we completed a final review based on those, if you will, shortlisted banks. And when we looked at the taxable experience as well as pricing expectations and the proposed compensation, PFM ultimately recommended JP Morgan as the senior manager. For the co-manager position, given the selection of JP Morgan, we felt that FHN, so that's FHN Financial, would be a strong co-manager as a regional player and to attract additional additional investors under their platform. Then when we look further into the co-managers, we found that Academy Securities, which is veteran-owned, was very thorough and thoughtful around the overall transaction. They did not sort of shy away, even though they're a smaller entity. They were very thorough and thoughtful to their response. Similarly, Estrada, we found as Hispanic owned, we also felt that they were very thoughtful and thorough and also, fully answered all the questions and had a lot of similarities to that of JP Morgan. So we thought they would complement them well. Because we like to create healthy competition within these banks and really for them to complement each other, we also recommend Siebert Williams Shank, which is minority and woman owned, co-manager to serve in that capacity as well. And just, I feel like I should say, so Bank of America, as you recall, was listed as one of the top 3 for the senior manager position. We do not believe in our experience that adding a Bank of America necessarily adds to new investors if you have a JP Morgan already in that team. So we felt it was better to select smaller and or regional or minority owned enterprises to support. Because fees often come up and we want to be very clear and transparent of the fees. The way that banks are they're paid on a dollar per bond basis. We did some calculations here for you to see. This is all of those that were labeled in that senior manager. The average cost was about $3.59 a bond. That's inclusive of their expenses, which results in approximately $287 average. You can see JP Morgan's right in the middle, and they were an average of approximately $290,000. Just to be clear, not all that compensation will go to JP Morgan. It would actually be split amongst the entire banking team as well. So the senior manager sets the price in terms of their compensation, but then they ultimately have to share it with all the underpinning banks that are supporting them as co-managers. So based on our running of the process, our experience, and recognizing that usually lowest cost, strong support team to attract investors, we ultimately recommended JP Morgan as the senior, FHN Financial, Siebert Williams, Academy, and Estrada all as co-managers to support and the potential of an offering of this bond issue. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Sure, thank you.
Since there are no questions, is there a motion to approve the resolution as presented? I'll make that motion. Is there a second? A second. Okay, so, all in approval, say yes. Yes. Anyone disapprove? Okay, so that is, 5 approval, and resolution passed. 6. We also have some further things to discuss on the agenda.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So 3 items that we have listed for discussion items are the lease agreement that would be entered into between the Sports Authority and the Chattanooga Lookouts, the land donation agreement, which would be a land donation from the current property owner to the Sports Authority, and then a development agreement with the developer of the property. And we have Mark Mamontoff here today. You all may recall Mark has been here for previous meetings, and you all hired him and his firm to represent the Sports Authority as bond counsel. And he's also, able to do other work on behalf of the Sports Authority. So I will introduce Mark Mamontoff to come up and for some high level discussion about these 3 items, because these are really the 3, largest items that we have left in the process to get toward the point where we actually issue bonds and start building a stadium.
Thank you. Hey guys, hope y'all having fun. Lauren's did a good report. So great to be here as always. Let's start with the agreement we're focusing on right now, working on a draft is we need to identify a site. We all generally have seen pretty pictures of where a stadium might go, but we need a real site, a legal description. Where would this stadium actually be located? And so, my understanding is that the Perimeter Properties, who's current owner of the site, the Foundry site where is expected to go, is willing to contribute the land for the stadium. So we're drafting agreement that is somewhat like a land purchase agreement, but because it's anticipated that they would donate the property, it doesn't have a lot of the financial aspects of that, but it really sets forth a process. So what you will see is an agreement that says something to the effect of, look, the parties will get together, Perimeter, the team, the master developer, the new city, and the community, the sports authority, along with the city, the county, and let's look at where this exactly should go. Let's do our due diligence. There'll be a due diligence period where we'll need to get all the title work, the environmental work, have the opportunity to do soil drillings to see what the quality of the soil is, and to do those sort of things. And so this agreement will set forth that process. After the parties have had an opportunity to really look at it, then we'll try to agree upon a precise location. You'd have that surveyed. Eventually, it would have to be platted. It would have to be subdivided to create a platted area for the stadium. And also, you'll need to identify any access roads or things like that. I know that there's already, I think it's Chestnut Street that sort of heads that way, but there probably will need to be some additional access to the site. So this agreement would address all these issues and establish the process to do that. Once the site is fully identified, surveyed, platted, and at that point, then they would agree to contribute the property to us. There'll be lots of other stuff in there that I'm sure they're going to ask for, like, okay, we're going to give you this acreage. We expect you to actually build a stadium. So I'm sure there'll be some triggers that if we sit on it for too long, we can't just then, sell it off for a development that, we're doing this for the stadium. And so there certainly will be some triggers as to start dates and to what happens if for some reason the stadium is never built. The other big issue that we're going to have to deal with in this agreement is parking. Long term, I think the thought is there'll be quite a bit of development around there that will be structured parking in a number of the buildings, office buildings and the like, that'll be surrounding the stadium. And so a lot of surface parking is not the most aesthetically pleasing thing in the world. And obviously you'd like to be able to use as much of the structured parking that's going to be there anyway, long term. But in the short term, you're probably going to need some parking. And so we're going to have to identify areas that we can park on. It's not an easy walk from downtown our stadium, and that we're working on in Knoxville is right in the heart of our downtown area where there's a lot of garages and stuff around that people can park and walk to. It's just there's going to be a need to address parking here, and so this agreement is going to also need to address that. I would anticipate there will probably be parking easements instead of conveyance of property for that would over time transition to the use of these structured parking garages, but those are obviously issues that we're going to have to negotiate. So that's an important agreement that probably be one of the first things that you'll see to do. Then there's the lease itself to the team. Most of these leases are 50 to 70 pages long. So this is a substantial document with a lot in it. And I asked Jermaine how long I had, and he said, just talk as long as you need. And I could go through for a half an hour about what's going to be, but I sense that that's probably not what you would have in mind today. So I'm just going to hit some of the bigger overview issues. One is we got to figure out what we're actually leasing to the team. I mean, we have no specs, no design, like, hey, we're going to lease you a baseball stadium. It's going to have 12 seats and no outfield, but we're going to do it. Of course, we're not going to do that. We're going to have to, agree upon a design. We're going to have to agree that they'll lease it consistent with once it's built, consistent with that design. And then there's the key financial issues. How long of a lease? What's publicly been discussed and is a 30-year lease. I know there's a lot of questions about that. Some would say, wait a minute, the team would like it as long as possible because they would like control of the stadium. You know, the 30 years has generally been used because it matches up with the term of the financing. Why is this financing 30 years instead of 20 years? Well, we will have a 30-year income stream from the state government, from all the sales taxes from the stadium. It's a good income stream. And so you don't want to finance for 20 years and leave 10 years of state money on the table. So you almost certainly are going to want to do a 30-year financing. So you would like to have all your revenue streams match up. And so the thought would be that you would have the same term of a commitment for lease payments. And as what's been publicly discussed, is $1 million a year with a 1.5% inflation escalator, which obviously inflation's gone up since that was discussed. But once the private development surrounding the stadium reach certain limits, certain goals, then the escalator would stop, is again what's been publicly discussed. I know that this will be an issue that will be discussed a lot. Why fixed rent? Why are we not the revenue streams? Those are really legitimate questions, and I'm sure at some point a long discussion about that. Usually the big item that people ask about is naming rights. So if it's, if I'm paying $500,000 a year for it to be called Mammoth Stadium, which is not likely because nobody could pronounce that, but it's, why do we not share in that as a community? And so we can. That's sometimes done on some of these leases. The downside for sharing revenues and these things is a trade-off. You want certainty. So if you know you have $1 million a year, you can finance against that, right? If you have variable income streams, you're gambling a little bit on those income streams. Naming rights agreements usually last 5 to 10 years. And so you are subject to the risk of renewal. And so you're sort of betting on that. But are these things we could look into? Sure. And those will certainly be some things. But one thing that I think I've mentioned to you briefly this before is we want to try to do as much of the stadium using tax exempt bonds, that the interest on the bonds is tax exempt. And so the interest rate will roughly be 30% lower on tax exempt versus taxable bonds. The bonds that are tied to the lease payments will be taxable bonds. They'll bear roughly a 30% interest rate, higher than the tax exempt bonds. So you will have some bonds already that are taxable. If we go on a revenue sharing basis on the lease, on concessions, on things like that that are operated by the team, then all our bonds would be taxable. Particularly with interest rates having risen, it costs us quite a bit of money if we go for more of a revenue sharing model than a fixed rent model. So that's sort of the another pro and con that you have to weigh. And Lauren and her team can help us do that in the pros and cons of trading off rent versus taxable versus tax exempt interest. There's one key issue will be, and you all talked about it a little bit. Okay, how much does the community get to use it? Well, I would anticipate that the stadium will be open as a public amenity, that if you wanted to take a break and go park and go walk around it on a rainy day, that you could, this typically it's about a quarter mile around a baseball stadium. So people can do their, instead of going to the mall, they can go and do their laps around the baseball stadium and have a nice thing. So you would probably want that. You would certainly want a number of civic event days a year that you can reserve. We've sort of agreed upon 8 in Knoxville. That's no magic number. It's whatever, you can agree upon. It's hard to do a lot of civic events because you've got to plan them around the baseball games and other things that might be going on there. But you certainly want to reserve some right to do that. Obviously, another big issue that we'll see is who's maintaining the stadium. Almost certainly the team will do that on a day-to-day basis, that you will incur no day-to-day expenses for like fixing the toilets and filling the soap dishes and things like that, and day-to-day repairs. The bigger issue is ongoing capital improvements over a 30-year period. There's certainly going to need to be things that are fixed. There's likely to be a roof that'll need to be replaced. So what you will see is provisions regarding a capital reserve that will be built up over time to cover those things, a budgeting process, a 5-year capital improvement budgeting process to try to plan for those capital improvements over a period of time. So that will be a significant aspect of the lease. You'll see quite a bit about insurance. Obviously, that's been we want to make sure, obviously, the stadium's properly insured, that you have proper liability insurance. You almost certainly are entitled to sovereign immunity, just like the city or the county. It's never really been litigated in the sports authority world, but my reading of the sports authority statute, and my friend Phil certainly can tell me if he disagrees, but is that you should be entitled to that, which is a good thing, but the team is not. So if they get sued because they spilt a Coke on the floor and somebody slips on it, we want to make sure they carry adequate insurance and that they hold us harmless and that we are listed as an additional insured on things. So you'll see that. Another issue that will come up in the lease, that, again, I'm telling you sort of things that you might be thinking about, is their ability to sign the lease. Say they want to sell the team another day. What are the terms under which we'll allow them to do that? What about transfer of ownership? Your ownership structure is quite convoluted, not in a bad way, but it's much more many owners, a group of local owners, as well as obviously folks that are not here locally. So there's not, obviously Hardball Capital manages the team and has a lengthy management agreement, as I understand it. But so that's going to be a little bit harder than like if you have a single owner, essentially, as we have in Knoxville, where just he owns the team. So we sort of have that a little bit easier there. Then there's fairly lengthy provisions dealing with Major League Baseball and the PDL system, which is the Player Development League, which is what they call minor leagues today. And I'm a little bit embarrassed talking about it because Corey knows a whole lot more about this than I do, and so he may be laughing at me. But I've mentioned to you all before, has really franchise type system, much more like a McDonald's type, the more the independent sort of thing. And they want to exert a lot more control over the teams. And so they have some mandatory provisions that we were the first to negotiate under their new PDL system in Knoxville, and really candidly butted heads with them for a 2 or 3 month period. We worked out some language that I think is not, would it have been my first choice? No, but it was a compromise, and you'll obviously be seeing that, and we'll want to walk you all through that carefully. But basically what they're wanting to do is they want a seat at the table. If the team goes down the tubes, they want to be able to put a substitute team here in Chattanooga. They want and the big issue, to me, the biggest issue is if, if this team doesn't meet AA requirement, if the stadium didn't meet AA requirements, say 15 years from now, what is our obligation to meet those requirements? They're constantly changing. As I understand, your current stadium does not meet current AA requirements. And so, but you have no obligation to upgrade it to that purpose. And so we've worked really hard to try to make clear that we would not have that obligation here. But what happens if, that they say, oh, you got to go to 9,500 seats from what you have. We don't have room to add 2,000 seats. Can they terminate the franchise? What happens? And there's a negotiating process in this lease that you'll see that brings Major League Baseball to the table. There's obviously, and particularly in this site, environmental issues. We're under a brownfield agreement for all or portion of the site, depending on where the site is. Brownfield agreements are good, not bad, because they give you some protection at the state level from that. Basically, if you comply with the brownfield agreement, as a new owner of the property basically does not have exposure for prior sins of the owners. That's something that you will want to look at carefully and make sure we explain that well to you. But you'll see provisions about that and who's dealing, who's responsible for prior environmental contamination, and then certainly any contamination that the team causes, which is not likely because it's not a risky environmental endeavor. Is obviously they would deal with those issues. Then you'll see a whole section on community issues in terms of encouraging them to hire for services at the stadium to meet DBE goals, to use their best efforts to do that. Again, assuming that you will want that sort of thing, those sort of provisions. Also, we built an internship program into our lease. I think you all will like that, and we'll show you all that. It's a great opportunity for young people to work in a business that I think is a lot of people. Sports industry generally is something pretty cool. It attracts a lot of people. So you'll see that in the lease when we get a draft to you all. So those are sort of the highlights of the lease. The big difference from our process in Knoxville is that we have, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, some of you have heard this, is that we use a turnkey development agreement with essentially Randy Boyd. So that an entity that he formed is going to agree to build the stadium at a fixed cost, and that if it goes over that cost, once we agree on the cost, that's on him. And so it's a very different thing. He's already bought all the land. He's doing he and other partners are doing a lot of development all around it. Here, you have a new city, which is an unrelated, very reputable private developer. Then you have the team, which is not they're not a developer. And so they're not someone who's looking. They certainly want a seat at the table on what the stadium looks like, as does the master developer, but they're really not positioned to do a turnkey development agreement for the stadium. And so the thought here is that the Sports Authority, being you all, would actually procure the construction design of the stadium in consultation with the team and the master developer. Will there still be a development agreement? Certainly the team would like one, and I think it's wise that we have something. I'm still struggling with exactly what that agreement will say, but essentially it would be the process agreement, I think, that says, okay, how do we hire a design firm? I'm sure Mr. Fryer over here would if he, I think he's here, it would tell you, we need someone that understands MLB requirements. There are outstanding architectural firms here that can partner with somebody, but somebody needs to understand, you need netting in this area to comply with the safety requirements for a team. So you want to make sure your design team understands Chattanooga, understands the Foundry site, understands what you're all trying to accomplish from an urban planning perspective, but also understands how to build a stadium that meets MLB requirements for a AA stadium. So, and then you want to make sure you hire a contractor that understands how to build this type of facility. So I think you all would be much more, with the cities and counties assistants, engaged in the procurement aspect of it, where in our case, we're hiring, again, a turnkey developer who then will hire the design team, already has hired the design team and the contractor that they want to use. We certainly have had a ton of input on that at the community level, but ultimately the contracting risk will be with the developer and not with the Sports Authority in our case. That's a little bit unusual. Like the most recent soccer stadium in Nashville was built by the Sports Authority, contracted for it, but certainly the team had a lot of input in that. I think if I've missed anything. I think that covers what I was wanting to cover. Glad to answer questions. I think you'll see, along with these, the land donation agreement, the lease, the development agreement, you're going to need to we'll also see, and again, I'm not really even sure who the parties should be yet, of some sort of master development agreement with New City, because we really want to obviously see some commitment for beginning the development of the property around the stadium. The whole idea is to trigger a development of the entire redevelopment of the site. So we want to make sure that's going to be happening at the same time. Questions? Anything? I think.
Mark, what do you think about the timing of when all this stuff will occur around here? Because it looks like you got to get a donation agreement first before you do a lease, so you know what you're actually leasing out.
Yeah. I would gladly. Lawyers are great if they have forms, that they can change the names. I know you all are shocked by that it's easier that if we have a form in place. But I've actually, this donation agreement is somewhat unique, and so I'm trying to really tailor it to what you all need. I expect to have a draft to certainly to the city and the county and to them to look at, as well as hopefully the property owner next week. And I'm hoping that we'll be in a position to take this to you at your next meeting to look at. Obviously, the team would like to have the lease done as quickly as possible. We're fine tuning the last bits of the Major League Baseball requirements in our lease in Knoxville. So I was trying to translate that into your lease to try to save a little bit of time. So, and I told Jason that. And so that may follow. I do think the property agreement is going to be the one that's going to probably come to you all first. We may be in a position to share with you a draft of the lease. The next one certainly wouldn't ask you to vote on it at that point, but because again, it's going to be a long one and you may want to schedule a little bit of time to go through it really carefully. I'm sure the city and the county are going to want to have a lot of input on it as well. I mean, there's the legal answer, which is no. Then there's the economic answer is it's a much better story. And when you're selling bonds, if you have all, these key agreements in place, I mean, ultimately the credit quality of the bonds is tied largely to the city and the county under their commitments under the interlocal agreement. So therefore, legally, you could theoretically sell bonds. I would probably say we should get these done before we do that. I'd be interested where my friend Lauren goes. She's still sitting here. What do you think?
I would vote yes.
Yes, there you go. So
In board examples of lease agreements, land donation agreements, and development agreements sent to us.
sure. Leases, I probably have 7 or 8, and I'm glad to share those from around the country that I've been collecting, trying to get the more recent ones. More than glad to do that on leases. And I would encourage you to look at them and get an idea where they're going. The land donation agreement is basically a hybrid of just a regular real estate purchase contract with some bells and whistles. As I was mentioning, I don't have I don't have something that I can share with you and say, hey, I did this over here. So I don't really have something on there to share with you. The development agreement, I can certainly share the one, is a public document, what we're working on in Knoxville, and can share with you some other. But again, those are turnkey development agreements here. This one, I just don't think it's going to say very much other than we're going to cooperate and make sure the design of the stadiums, works well for everyone. But I'm glad to share with you other development agreements. So certainly you may be interested in what a turnkey development agreement looks like versus what we're talking about doing here. And I can certainly get that to you.
I have a question about the community benefits agreement.
Yes.
Caleb is initiating. At our last meeting, we had committees that were developed. One of them was engagement from this authority with the community. And Edna and I signed up to be on that committee. And we both have kind of been involved with some of their meetings. I went to 2, or sat in front of Zoom for 2 of them. And they are formulating these different subjects. So my question is, where are we in that conversation that the community has with Taylor specifically, and where you are now?
So, community benefits agreements, I don't know, I'm sort of stating the obvious, but maybe just want to make sure we're on the same, take many different forms. But the form that is usually sort of bandied about here in Tennessee is the one that really the only one that's been signed in Tennessee is the one for the soccer stadium. It's between a nonprofit community group and the team. Many of the things that are in the agreement are not things that a public body legally can agree to. They are private agreements by the team owner and thing. The team was overseeing they were able to oversee a much broader aspect. Basically, the family there was guaranteeing all the bonds and things like that. So it was a much broader agreement. It was also a public property. It was on the old fairground site, or still the current state fairground site. And so there was a real history there. And there was this feeling that there should be a extra effort for to address some neighborhood needs. And I'm not suggesting you don't do it here, but basically, if there is such agreement, it usually takes a parallel path to. You want an agreement if with the master developer, say New City, as to certain units or something like that, that would be a separate agreement that should be going parallel working on here. What our agreements, what I envision, of course, this is totally your call. I'm just, again, I'm a scrivener, as I like to say, is usually what we try to deal with is what a community legally can address in this kind of agreement. So at the procurement level, we'll certainly be trying to encourage participations, DBE participation. I know there's often a feeling about local participation. You're getting into a pretty constitutionally risky area saying we want contractors from Chattanooga. Personally, I totally believe in that. I hope I would love to see, but because of interstate commerce reasons and things like that, can be, again, a very tricky issue to deal with. So, I think when you see the lease, you'll say, hey, that touches on a few of the things that we're interested in, such as engagement, the internship program, engagement with youth, the DBE language, both in the lease and ultimately in the procurement of the construction. But some of the other issues that were particularly raised in the community benefit agreement in Nashville, such as affordable housing, childcare, things like that, are really not issues that we at the governmental level can really address.
Mark, just for clarity, Mark, no governmental entities will be a party to the community benefits agreements, correct? I mean, I just wanted to clear that for the record. There is no plan for any of the government entities, neither the sports authority, the city, nor the county, to be party to any community benefits agreements. That would be between the community organizations, possibly the team, the developer, the property owner, but it would not be between any governmental entities. We will, of course, as Mark said, from the procurement side, the sports authority procurement side, we much as we can under the legal authority we have, but otherwise we would not be party to the agreements. And I just want to make sure that was clarified for everybody's information.
That's helpful. You said that in working with partners, we need to work with people who know how to build stadiums. You also said we need to know Chattanooga. So what comes under knowing Chattanooga?
Well, I would think, for example, on the design.
These community meetings were part of that.
Right. Well, the design team is what I had in mind. I mean, the Foundry site is sort of, I'd say, dilapidated as it now has a great history, and it's the entire neighborhood was brought about it. I just think this is my personal view, is tying the site to the history of the area and understanding the history of the area, not just having a baseball stadium, I would think in your all's mind is important, and the connectivity to the greenways that are running already through there and to the river. And I mean, whoever is working on the design for this, I would think that's the sort of thing that you all would, really care about and would want. Again, and I saw that Jason came in while I was chatting, or he may have been here and I just missed him, but that to me is what a local design firm could probably bring, who understands, the history of the area and the community, understands the South Broad district and the work that all of you, I know that you've been very actively involved in, to try to help that. And so, our stadium in Knoxville is going in a historic, in what was a historically Black neighborhood that largely, parts of it were taken by urban renewal, and we're trying to, acknowledge that, address some of that history and try to make sure people understand, the history of the area in which the stadium. And I guess I love that kind of thing. And I think my guess is that you all will want to see, similar attributes for this stadium. So, yeah.
Soon we're gonna have a survey to try to figure out what we take and what we don't take here. We'll also have to include that in our lease agreement to be able to lease the property to this body.
Right.
That part of it, is that gonna be, I guess, one of the first things we'll see?
So in the donation agreement that we're working on, exactly, Phil, that we have that process. First, obviously, you would say, okay, here, you would outline a specific area essentially on a map, and then send the surveyors to work. Eventually, I appreciate if you correct me if I'm wrong, we're gonna have to plat it. I mean, because it's gonna have to be conveyed, and so it'll have to be become a separate parcel, so that it can be conveyed to the Sports Authority. And then again, we have to also, as we do the platting, we have to say, okay, where do we need access? Where is is this, you're going to need either easements or road access to get good access to the stadium.
We actually district here, economic impact on people involved, much of South Chattanooga in connection with that. So that will also be part of the area taxing and financing to actually provide some of the ability to be able to pay this back.
And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that these are the key. As Lauren, there's going to be a bond indenture under which, assuming you issue debt, you're going to have a very lengthy document that when I was a young lawyer, I thought this was the biggest bunch of gibberish I've ever read in my life. And I've read it so many times that it gets sort of used to it. But eventually you'll be asked to adopt a bond resolution. There'll be a bond indenture under which the bonds are issued. That establishes the pledging of the revenue streams to secure the bonds. And there'll be other documents. Essentially, as you may saw from the resolution on the underwriter, which I helped draft, you've designated underwriter, but they don't, until you are ready to sell bonds and sign a document called a bond purchase agreement. That's when you agree. That's when you actually have a legal relationship with them. That's when they agree to buy your bonds and you would agree to pay them something to sell the bonds for you. Until then, they're very nice people, and you can, but they're not. We don't owe them anything, and so. But the financing documents will be quite substantial as well. You agree? Anything else? Do you want me to send some of those samples through to Phil? Is that okay? And you can distribute those? Yeah, Jermaine. Yeah. And Maria. Yes. I'll get those out to you guys. And I may provide a little bit of cover of like, okay, this one's anyway, a little bit of background on sort of what I've sent you, but we're glad to. And don't hesitate to call if you have questions. Thank you.
As we enter other business, Mr. Vice Chair, I just have one item I wanted to mention, just for you all to have the information. The board previously approved a resolution to allow its interlocal agreement with the city of Chattanooga, which is a reimbursement agreement that allows the city of Chattanooga to advance funding to do early work on the site. And then that money would be refunded from bond proceeds in the future. That is scheduled to go to City Council on November 22nd. I just wanted to make you all aware of that. You all have approved it, but we have to have approval from City Council as well. We have gotten some questions about why the city and county are not sharing these costs, and I've explained, one, it's just more practical for one of us to do it, and two, because the city is the primary, administrative, financial, and legal support. It's easier for us just to advance the funds at 100% and get reimbursed, which is, no cost to the city. Of course, I'm always happy to take county money if y'all are interested, but no, that I just want to make sure you all are aware of that, because that may end up in the news with our friends from the news media. And that is scheduled for the 22nd on the city council agenda. And we do plan to start doing some preliminary work, just because it's practical, especially it could be things like surveying and different things that Mark and Phil have mentioned that need to be done for us to make any progress. So, yeah, we'll get, when Jermaine returns, he'll be back in a couple of days, but I'll make sure that Jermaine gets that scheduled with all of you. Thank you.
I believe it's the second Thursday of next month.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. December 8th. There's no other meeting scheduled for November, primarily due to Thanksgiving. So I believe the next one is December 8th.
tonight. Meeting adjourned.